Good morning and happy Saturday, everybody. My name is Lamika Burnett, and this is Girlfriends Pray Real Talk. I am so excited to have this special guest with us this morning. We are going live on YouTube. We are going live on the Girlfriends Pray Facebook page. So if you are joining the live, when you come into the room, please say hello and good morning and tell us where you are tuning in from so that we can give you a proper welcome. Again, my name is Lamika Burnett. I am part of the team from Girlfriends Pray, and I am excited to welcome you here today and also our special guest, Dr. Iyantta Howell. Um, Girlfriends Pray is a prayer ministry for women. Our mission is to draw more women closer to God through prayer, and our vision is 1 million women around the world united in prayer. And so this is one of the ways that we get women connected. We have virtual live events so that we can talk about the real things that are going on in our lives, things that are pertinent to our lives today, and things that we need to know. So if you did not know, Girlfriends Pray has a daily prayer call, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can call in the mornings at 7 a.m. and join us for a word of prayer. You don't have to say anything. You just listen in, receive the word of the Lord, and move about your day. So 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Girlfriends Pray prayer call. You can find additional details on the Girlfriends Pray website, and that is at www.girlfriendspray.org. You can also get prayer on demand. So we have a podcast, if you didn't know that, and it's the Girlfriends Pray podcast. Prayer on demand means you search through the prayers and they are categorized by subject. So if you need a specific need prayed for, go to the Girlfriends Pray podcast wherever podcasts are delivered, and you can get a prayer on demand. Isn't that amazing? Prayer on demand. Let me know where you guys are joining in. Let me know where you're tuning in from. We need to know that so we can properly welcome you. In addition to that, we are streaming right now live on YouTube and live on Facebook. So again, we want to say welcome. And if you didn't know, Girlfriends Pray Real Talk is a 4-week series. So this is week 2, and we are talking to Dr. Iyantta Howell, and we're going to be talking about managing stress and anxiety. Now, the goal of the Real Talk series is to educate our sisters on the importance of maintaining mental wellness. And in order to do this, we facilitated, in order to facilitate these discussions, we've invited subject matter experts for these important discussions. Now, within the African American community, we know that there is the belief that no matter how great the burden, prayer is the answer. And we know this, and we recognize this, and we agree. But we also know that as women of faith, we understand the power of prayer, but we also know that God gives wisdom to train mental health professionals to support us through difficult times. So that is the purpose of this Real Talk series. So right now, I'm going to welcome our guest, Dr. Iyantta Howell, and we are going to be talking about managing stress and anxiety. We're also going to be talking about recognizing anxieties and the common causes of anxiety, and also how certain foods can impact your mood. In addition, she will also be sharing with us practices for self-care. And then we'll also have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions as the chat is going on, please feel free to DM those questions to us, and someone from the team will make sure that I get those questions. And without further ado, we're going to welcome Dr. Iyantta Howell. She is listen to this, a double board certified child and adolescent psychiatrist with over 12 years of experience. She has worked with a variety of clinical environments, including inpatient and outpatient settings, as well as prisons, residential treatment facilities, and partial hospital program. She has a degree, her bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan, and her medical degree from Wayne State University School of Medicine. And she completed her child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship training at the University of Pennsylvania Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Listen to that. Amen. She enjoys working with all age group and has served ethnoculturally diverse populations, engaging with patients, families, and partnering with team members within complex organizational structures. And she has also served as a mentor for our youth for over 15 years. So let's welcome Dr. Iyantta Howell.
Thank you. Thank you for that beautiful welcome. Thank you for having me. I feel it to be an honor to be here today. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Howell. It's great to see you today. You look beautiful this morning. So
thank you.
If we say anything during this broadcast that resonates with you, please drop it in the chat. If you have any questions as we are talking, please also DM those, and one of the team members will make sure that I receive those questions so that we can address any question that you may have as we move ahead. All right, so as a psychiatrist, you will be considered a mental health professional, but can you please explain to us what a psychiatrist does and how your role is different from that of a therapist or a counselor?
Absolutely. So a psychiatrist is a physician. So they've been trained in medical school. So because of that training, psychiatrists have knowledge of the inner workings of the human body. So they are able to determine if, mental health symptoms are due to a psychological condition or if it's due to a medical process that's going on in an organ system outside of the brain itself. And they do that by, ordering labs or medical tests to make that determination, because sometimes some medical illnesses can actually mimic psychiatric disorders. For instance, if a person has thyroid issues, for example, they can present as someone who's very anxious when in fact it's just the thyroid hormones are off and it's throwing off their moods. The same thing with problems with one's adrenal gland, or if someone had issues with, say, low vitamin D levels, sometimes that can look like depression. So psychiatrists are able to kind of tease those things out and make sure that a person's receiving treatment. If they need medical treatment, to make sure they're receiving that, or if they need, for instance, psychiatric medications, a psychiatrist will prescribe those things. And those things can be antidepressant medications, antipsychotic medications for anxiety, those types of things. So a therapist, on the other hand, didn't go to medical school, but they have a lot of training. They typically have an undergraduate degree and also a graduate degree where they've majored in the field of psychology. So in that way, they are well-versed in a lot of different psychotherapeutic interventions to really help that patient. And they do that through things like talk therapy and other types of interventions. So, a therapist may call upon a psychiatrist to prescribe psychiatric medications if, for instance, that patient's, symptoms aren't getting better. We may add a medication to kind of help with that. So a psychiatrist and a therapist, they work together to really meet the needs of the patient. They meet their psychological and medical needs as a team.
That's excellent. So I see that we have Richmond, Virginia tuning in. We have Atlanta. We have Detroit. Shout out to Laurel, Maryland. Chicago is here. Austin, Texas. Baltimore is in the house. Houston, Indianapolis, Wilmington, Delaware, and also New York. So all of you, please share to your social networks so that everybody can get all of this good information that we are sharing today by Dr. Howell. Back to our discussion. Is there a difference between, can you define stress and how is that different from anxiety?
Absolutely. So stress is really kind of an umbrella term that's used to describe a generalized state of psychological unrest. So that could mean, stress could mean a person's depressed or, they're sad or even nervous. And in the world of psychiatry, the technical term for nervousness is anxiety. So those are kind of the difference. Now, anxiety is really defined when a person has like an intense, excessive, or persistent worry that they really can't shake. Okay.
Mhm.
And that kind of goes hand in hand with people who've been traumatized. Trauma really is a more severe form of anxiety, and that usually involves a threat to a person's body or life. Um, so a person can have trauma, which can bring on anxiety, but you can have anxiety without necessarily having trauma. And stress can kind of describe all of those things in addition to depression, just any kind of psychological unrest. So it's normal for us to, be anxious for a few minutes if we're preparing for a stressful situation,
Mhm.
such as speaking publicly or, taking an exam. And after those stressors are done with, normally we relax and we're able to just go about our day. But people who have an actual anxiety disorder, it's very difficult for them to relax, even when they're at rest, right? There's nothing really going on, but they are constantly worried. They're keyed up, they're on edge.
Mhm.
They really just have a hard time relaxing. So that's kind of the difference there.
Got it. So how does one go about recognizing the signs of anxiety or signs of anxiety in yourself or in others? Because I know with the pandemic, people are under a lot of different, I mean, there's a lot of different varying priorities as far as work. Children are home from school, homeschooling, things like that. How can we recognize those signs?
Well, that's actually a great question. Um, Usually your body will tell you. Okay. So your body kind of sends you signals. And the challenge sometimes is really slowing down enough to recognize those signals, right?
Right.
So oftentimes we can have, um, chronic headaches, stomach aches. We can have problems with our appetite, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times with anxiety, you have a lot of tenseness or tightness in muscle groups because anxiety tends to really hide inside the body, particularly in the muscle groups. It likes to target the muscle groups. So if you notice that maybe you're very tense, particularly in the neck and the back region, that can certainly indicate anxiety. Like I said, headaches, stomach aches with no medical cause, chronic, if that's chronic, that can indicate anxiety. Some people with anxiety also suffer from, symptoms of shortness of breath, racing heart, sweaty palms, in anticipation, like I said, of a stressful situation. But some
Mm-hmm.
people have those things going on all the time. So they're in a constant state of unrest. And when they're in that, in that constant state of unrest, there's a lot of stress hormones that are released, like cortisol, epinephrine. And there's just, it just really keeps the person from relaxing. So those are sometimes things that you can look at, say, okay, well, am I anxious? What are some signs of that? Another less common sign of anxiety are things like irritability,
Mm-hmm.
anger. Oftentimes, I'm sure we all know people who are very irritable, just kind of, they're just contrary. They really can't interact with the environment. They don't have a lot of friends. They like to keep to themselves
Mm-hmm.
because they can't really tolerate the stress of normal life. And a lot of times that irritability can actually be undiagnosed anxiety, right? Because in our society, in the Western culture, it's more acceptable to, exhibit the quote unquote strong emotion of anger than it is to kind of be vulnerable and really express that, hey, I'm really struggling with anxiety or fear. So a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times those things can definitely, be confused.
Got it.
Yeah.
Um, what kinds of things do you think can worsen our anxiety?
You know, um, there are a lot of things that can worsen anxiety, but I think that let's back up a little bit and just talk about maybe some causes of anxiety.
Go
I
ahead.
think that,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of things that can cause anxiety. Um, and sometimes it's difficult to say what exactly can cause anxiety
Mm-hmm.
because what you
Mm-hmm.
might find stressful, I might not find stressful.
Got it.
Right? So that can be subjective. But generally speaking, unwanted or sudden change will bring on anxiety, right? Because with that, it introduces a sense of uncertainty, right? This change I didn't want, I didn't anticipate. Now I'm uncertain about my future. And we know that uncertainty is the breeding ground for anxiety. So anxiety is when I try to control an outcome that is beyond my ability to control. Right? And I think if we reflect just on last year, 2020, I mean, there are tons of examples that demonstrate, wow, all of these things are just completely out of my control, right? Many people lost their jobs. Unfortunately, many people lost their lives. So you have a lot of people who are grieving. You have a lot of people who lost their sense of independence because, you know, they may have contracted COVID, and thankfully, although they didn't die, they may still be struggling with some medical issues, right? Many people they experienced a loss of control over their own schedules or control over their own extracurricular or social activities because of the quarantine. We really weren't allowed to socialize like we did prior to COVID-19. So those are all losses that can certainly bring on anxiety. Parents are more anxious than ever before because with schools closing due to COVID, you know, all of a sudden they had to scramble and find childcare, you know, and at the same time really try to support the educational, you know, goals and duties and responsibilities of their child while assisting them, you know, with getting online with the virtual learning, while at the same time trying to meet their own demands of work. And in many cases, a lot of parents found that really an impossible task. So that increased a lot of their anxiety. So that's one thing. So unwanted or sudden change can certainly do that. Another thing is unaddressed trauma, right? So a lot of us have had traumatic experiences that maybe we don't quite recognize as being traumatic, but those things can certainly creep up later in life. For instance, childhood trauma is extremely common, and you know, it's a major culprit for anxiety that we can experience as adults. So very interestingly, in 1995, Kaiser Permanente collaborated with the Center for Disease Control, and they did a study that really examined the effects that childhood trauma had on a person's life once they became an adult. The name of the study was the ACE study, and that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So this study basically asked the participants of the study tons of questions about different types of trauma that they, you know, experienced during their childhood. And for every yes that the participants answered, they would get a point. And the higher the score on this particular questionnaire, then the greater the chance that that person would actually go on to develop mental health issues such as anxiety, depression. And not only that, these people were actually more prone to developing tons of medical illnesses just from the childhood trauma. Things like diabetes, heart disease, cancers. So the study also concluded that because of a lot of these traumas, that it could actually decrease the life expectancy by about 15 years. So, like I said, there were a lot of questions. And just to give you an example of some of the questions that they asked in the ACE study, one question was, before your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? Another question is, did a parent or other adult in the household act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you or violate you sexually? Was there substance abuse in the household? Was there domestic violence in the household as a child? Was there issues of food insecurity? You know, was there a parent who was incarcerated while you were growing up? So all of these things can compound to really create distressing events that can actually develop into any kind of mental health disorder and medical issues as well. Now, I don't want to kind of be hopeless with the results of this study, because there were some other studies that came out that said, you know what, although the life expectancy could be decreased from these traumas, there were a lot of things that if they were introduced into a person's life at any point, it could actually be protective and reverse some of these adverse effects. And these were things like, if the child, or even later in life, if they were exposed to positive role models, right? Positive figures. If they had positive outlets, were they involved in extracurricular activities or other creative outlets? Basically, did they have other supportive people, supportive activities that they engaged in that actually helped to minimize or mitigate some of these effects of the childhood trauma? So that certainly, was a pivotal study. And a lot of people will refer to that study to really explain a lot of adverse outcomes. And I think sometimes we experience, like I said, a lot of these traumas in our childhood, but then we will minimize the effects of them and we won't seek treatment because we think that, you know what, everyone's been through this, right? And it's not so bad, but our bodies always tells the story, okay? There is a book called The Body Keeps Score, and it really goes into a lot of detail about how these memories, traumatic experience are actually stored in our bodies, in our cells, in our tissues, and that no matter how much we may try to suppress them or ignore them, they are going to come out in some way, shape, or form. So that could be another cause of anxiety, which is unaddressed childhood issues or childhood trauma. Yeah. Another reason that a person may become anxious is, they could just be what we call genetically predisposed to becoming anxious. So that means
what does that mean? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that means that just like we can inherit high blood pressure or diabetes or obesity from our parents, we can also inherit the genes that would make it more likely for us to have a mental health issue such as anxiety.
Okay.
So a lot of times you just have the genetics that kind of predisposed you to developing that. In addition to that, there are certain personality types that can kind of set you up for you to develop anxiety. One of those is kind of the perfectionistic personality type. And I think we all know it's kind of the type A personality, someone who's very rigid and flexible in a lot of their mindsets. That can really set a person up for anxiety because, as we know, life is very unpredictable, right? We can't structure a lot of things about our lives. So that's pretty common. And another cause that I think is very important to talk about is, us not recognizing the limitations of our humanity. Okay.
Speak more about that, please. Please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think especially in faith-based communities that, you get this message that, if you have a mental health disorder, that all you need to do is fast more or pray more or read your Bible more, and you're not believing God enough. Like I myself, I'm a Christian and I grew up in church. I grew up attending church for many years. And sometimes from different ministers or different spiritual leaders, you will hear them say those types of things. You just need to, pray more. You're not believing God. You're not reading your word, those types of things. And then some people may even say, you have unconfessed sin in your life. And I'm not necessarily saying that those things can't be culprits because, we all could use to pray more and read our Bibles more. But sometimes we can do things, our lifestyle habits can be situated in such a way that we're doing things to actually create mental health conditions for ourselves. For instance, sometimes people in these faith-based communities will say those things, you really need to just do more spiritual disciplines, basically, not recognizing that if at the same time, those people are not taking care of themselves. You have a lot of people who glorify working excessively, even within, church communities, faith-based communities. So you work yourself excessively. You don't get proper sleep, right? You're not eating properly. The foods that you put in your body are really wreaking havoc, not just on your physical self, but,
Mm.
psychologically, right? So I think that instead of jumping to a spiritual solution to a mental health issue, I think it's more practical to kind of say, well, are there natural things in my
Got
life
it.
that may be causing that, right?
Mhm.
Because sometimes we can spiritualize the cause of a toll that some of these unwise lifestyle decisions
Mm.
has on us. So
Mhm.
again,
Mhm.
recognizing the limitations of our humanity, meaning that we're human, right? God could have created us to be angels, right? Who didn't need rest or who could fly everywhere and who never got sick. But he
Right.
created us to be humans. He didn't create us to be angels. And we have to honor God's decision in
Amen.
making us humans. We have limitations, and when we don't stay within the confines of those, then we will experience mental health issues in addition to, like I mentioned before, medical issues. So I think that, knowing when to stop, knowing when to quit, knowing when to actually take advantage of all that vacation time that you have saved up at your job,
Right.
these are all very important things.
Mhm.
So another thing I wanted to add to that is, I know we have quite a few people tuning in who are well versed in the Bible and, they know a lot about different stories in the Bible, but I wanted to bring attention to a couple of stories in the Bible that I think kind of speaks to the issue that I'm talking about. So one particular story involved, a very commonly known prophet, a very
Mhm.
popular prophet, Elijah, who at one point he feared for his life because he made some very important people mad. Okay, so the evil Queen Jezebel found out about what he did and he ran for his life. She basically issued a death threat and he ran for his life. And if you read the description of kind of his state of mind, it describes perfectly anxiety. Okay, so
Mhm.
he's running, he actually ran for a full day. It sounds like he didn't stop. And then when he finally stopped, I guess when he feels safe enough to stop, he tells God that I feel bad enough to die. I want you to kill me. Okay. And then the Bible says that he falls asleep. And then the next verse says that an angel came and gave him food. And then it says he ate the food and he went back to sleep. And then it says an angel came again, gave him more food, and told him that you need to eat in order to have enough strength for the journey ahead.
Mhm.
Now,
Mhm.
one could say, well, if an angel came, surely the angel could have just zapped him and gave him strength from that, right? Why did he need food? Why did he even need to rest? But I
Mhm.
think it speaks to a very important point that we have to really, again, stay within the confines of the limitations of our human body. We need rest, we need food, you know, and it's just very important because another interesting thing about that passage in the Bible is that just a few chapters before he decided he wanted to kill himself or wanted to die, he had God had used him to perform a mighty miracle,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
obviously the miraculous was accessible to him, but yet
Mm.
God chose to really not just meet his spiritual needs, but his
Right.
natural needs. And this was all kind of in the same context. And you see a similar pattern in the New Testament when Jesus, in one particular instance, he raised a young girl from the dead. He raised her up.
Right.
And then right after she was raised, he asked them to give her food, right? He said, give her something to eat. Now you would think, well, Jesus, you just raised her from the dead. Shouldn't she be energized? Like you just did a miracle.
Right.
But again, we have to meet the physical needs of our human bodies. And if we don't, a lot of times we can develop things like mental health issues and anxiety. So I think that there is a connection there, between the natural and the spiritual
Exactly.
based on how scripture is, written and interpreted. So, so that's something that's very important.
Gotcha. If
Yeah.
you are just joining us, we are talking to Dr. Iyantta Howell. This is Girlfriends Pray Real Talk. And today we are talking about managing anxiety and stress. And she just gave us some very practical examples from the Bible in honoring our humanity. So I think that's really important to note. So if you are with us today, please share this information to your network so that others can glean from all that we are enjoying from Dr. Howell this morning. We have a question posted, but I think I may wait a couple of minutes to ask that question. But the question kind of relates to my next question. What are some practices and habits that we can, put in place in our lives to help alleviate anxiety? And then the question that was posed related to exercise as opposed to medication.
Okay. So things that we can do to, alleviate our anxiety, I've mentioned some of them, is just making sure that you're getting proper rest.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because, we have a lot on our plates, maybe a little bit less on our plates since everything was shut down due to COVID. But it's very interesting because I was reading this study that found that although we were in a pandemic, people were speeding at higher rates than ever before. There were more traffic fatalities.
Wow.
And it's like, well, where are people going? Right.
Where y'all
But yeah, that's
going?
what the study said. They said that, for whatever reason, there's been an uptick in speeding fatalities during COVID-19. So I thought that was very interesting. So yeah, so just setting those limits, making sure you're getting enough rest. Exercise is also very important. The foods that you put in your body are also very important. There was one study in particular that talked about, how certain foods that actually can worsen your anxiety. Those things included sugar, caffeinated beverages, processed carbohydrates, alcohol. You want to avoid those things and really engage in activities that are actually positive and that actually help to increase the natural
endorphins,
the serotonins in the brain, the feel-good hormones. So exercise actually does that.
Mm-hmm.
You want to really have a lot of positive support in your life, people who are generally upbeat and can really help get you out of ruts, right? Because we can always find bad news and people who complain and can kind of bring our moods down, but being intentional about the type of people that you're around.
Amen.
And really avoiding a lot of conflict, stress, those types of things. Now, again, if you have a genetic predisposition toward mental illness, if you have anxiety, panic attack, maybe even post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a very severe form of anxiety, you're probably going to need more than just exercise, right? Because those are severe insults to the psyche, to the brain, to the chemicals in the brain. When you have trauma like that, exercise alone are not going to overcome those effects. So sometimes you have to seek therapy. And then depending on how severe the symptoms are, you may also want to couple that with psychiatric medications. So those are things that you can do in addition to actually engaging in the spiritual practices that you find supportive, right? Praying, reading your Bible, being around people of like faith. I think using all of these approaches as opposed to just saying, okay, well, you only need a medical approach, or you only need a psychiatric approach, or you only need a spiritual approach. I think the better option is to combine all of those approaches, right? And really just use all the tools that you have to get better. And I want to go back to, you asked a question that I wanted to make sure I answered. So you said something about what can worsen anxiety.
So I did ask before some of the things that about some of the things that can worsen anxiety, and I think you did touch on that as far as alcohol and some of the foods. But was there anything additional that you needed to add to that?
Yes. So sometimes, and this goes back to the unaddressed trauma. So sometimes we can have experiences in our lives that, although are not exactly like the trauma that we experienced in the past, it's just a reminder of that trauma. And then whenever we are exposed to those things, it kind of stirs up or triggers us. Examples would be a domestic violence survivor who, although he or she is no longer in an abusive relationship, whenever they're around a lot of noise, or whenever they are yelled at, or they see someone else being abused, it really triggers something inside of them. So a lot of times our own unaddressed trauma can worsen anxiety. Unaddressed grief can certainly do that. And something that was very interesting that has been proven is that a lot of times we can actually inherit traumatic experiences and memories from our ancestors. So there's been a lot of very exciting studies that have been happening in the last 10 years or so. One in particular happened at Emory University in 2013, where they found that certain genetic markers that they thought were actually wiped away at birth were actually used to basically transmit a single traumatic experience to the next generation. So
Okay.
in this particular study, what they did was they trained mice to fear the scent of cherry blossom. So how they did that was they would expose mice to the scent of cherry blossom, while at the same time they would shock these mice. They would give them an electric shock. And obviously that was very painful. So that would induce a lot of fear and anxiety in the mice. And they repeated this. They would introduce the scent, shock them, and they did this over and over. And it was a certain point where they no longer even had to introduce the shock. All they had to do was introduce the scent of the cherry blossom, and they would get the fear-based reaction of, the mice would squeal, they would run and hide, those types of things. So what they did was they had these mice, they bred these mice, and the baby mice, which they call pups, were actually, they were born, but at birth, they were separated from their biological parents, and they were raised by surrogate mice parents, basically. And these surrogate parents were not exposed to any kind of trauma. They were never exposed to the scent of cherry blossom, nothing. But what the researchers did was they exposed the pups, the baby mice, the pups, to the scent of cherry blossom. And what they found was that these pups had a very similar fear-based reaction when they just smelled the cherry blossom. They would run, they would squeal, they would hide, So what this told them was that, a lot of times a parent's DNA is actually modified based on the traumatic experiences that they go through, and that's actually transmitted to the next generation. And some studies that were similar to that even suggested that it was transmitted to future generations. So obviously this has a lot of implications in terms of what does that mean for people groups who've experienced things like the Holocaust, slavery, those types of things. Although the ancestors experienced that and the folks who were generations beyond them did not, you can still have some of the same fear-based reactions from triggers, right? And I think a lot of us experienced that with the whole, issues with the race relations this past year, where we would see or hear things that triggered us in ways that even surprised us, right? So, sometimes past trauma, either our own personal trauma or trauma from, past generations, can actually worsen anxiety in us. So sometimes it can be difficult to really tease these things out. That's why it's always good to see a mental health professional to kind of help you sort this out, because sometimes you can be making your own conclusions about why you feel a certain way. And sometimes you don't always have all the information. So it can get very complicated, but those are just some of the things that can worsen anxiety.
Got it. We have a couple questions. Would you like to address those questions now?
Sure.
Okay. So the one question says, is there any, we kind of talked about exercise. The one question was, is there any exercise to mitigate stress without medication? And then another question posted says, medication has side effects, so wouldn't natural foods help balance the health?
Well, I think it goes back to kind of what I was saying. It would really depend on the type of anxiety that you have and the extent of maybe the trauma that you've had. So it would be hard for me to answer that question because every person experiences and expresses anxiety differently. And I've seen in my own office people who have come to see me for medication after they've really struggled for years because they tried to go the natural route or do this or that. And then when I got really into their history and I start digging, they had some tremendous trauma, right? So although them exercising and eating certain foods was helpful, it really can't change the brain chemistry, right? Because
Okay.
you can be traumatized in such a way, as we just talked about, that it can actually turn off certain genes and turn on other genes that no matter how much, you know, healthy eating you're doing, you can't overcome those effects. It's almost like if you broke your leg and you're trying to use a splint, or you're trying natural remedies when really you need surgery, right?
Got
So
it. Okay.
it really depends on the severity of the illness and the symptoms that the person is actually experiencing. In terms of medication side effects, yes, you are right. Every medication has side effects, and that does not just include psychiatric medication. That's any medication,
Mm-hmm.
and the good news is that a lot of the psychiatric medications have been expanded in terms of there's a lot more variety of what we have to offer now versus
Mm-hmm.
even just 10, 15, 20 years ago. And a lot of the side effects are not nearly as sedating as some of them were. And a lot of them are very much well tolerated. But again, there's no medication without side effects. And a lot of times I will have a conversation with patients who are kind of what we call medication adverse. They don't really want to try the medication.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's I'll have them create a list with two columns. One column is the risk of taking this medication. And then the other column is the risk of me not taking this medication, right?
Got
Because
it.
if you have anxiety and it's debilitating to the point where you really can't function, then it may not make as much sense to not try that medication, because the anxiety really is interfering with your life, your dreams, your goals, your relationships. So it really kind of depends on what medication you're talking about, and really being willing to try medication if you tried everything else and it doesn't work.
Got it. We have another question related to vitamin D and how that can potentially help us in our lives. So can you speak a little bit about vitamin D and besides going outside, other ways to receive it? That's what the question says.
Absolutely. So vitamin D is actually, it's not a vitamin, it's a hormone.
Got it.
It's touted as a vitamin, but it's actually a hormone that's produced in the body. And it's in different forms. So vitamin D comes in different forms, variation. The main form of how humans get and metabolize and produce vitamin D is from sun rays.
Got it.
So we get vitamin D, it hits our skin, and it's absorbed into our bloodstream. Now, people who um, have more melanin in their skin, people who have more melanin, basically people of color,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's harder for them to absorb the rays in order for them to get the vitamin D, because the melanin actually blocks the absorption. So a lot of times doctors will supplement vitamin D in people of color. Vitamin D is vital. I think there's a lot more study that needs to be done on the health benefits of vitamin D, because it's
Mm-hmm.
extremely beneficial. And that actually came out more during COVID-19, because a lot of studies even showed that people who had low vitamin D levels were more susceptible to the dangerous and even deadly effects of COVID-19. So vitamin D, we've learned, is protective against mental health issues. Low vitamin D is linked to depression, anxiety. It's linked to lowering of our immune systems. And just getting enough vitamin D is vital. And if you live in states like Michigan, that can be even more of a challenge, because we really don't have a lot of days where we're exposed to a lot of sunshine. So really taking vitamin D orally can actually be very helpful. But I would really encourage people to follow up with their primary care doctors if they had any concerns about low vitamin D levels and
Mm-hmm.
those types of things. But yeah, vitamin D is a very important chemical.
Another question that's come through, it has said, are there any specific foods that we can eat to combat mental illness?
Well, again, it depends on what. I don't know if the person who asked the question means to prevent the onset of mental illness, or if you already have a mental illness, are there foods that you can use to treat that? Well, I mean, in general, things like almonds have been shown to kind of decrease anxiety. Other foods, are those that can kind of increase our production of tryptophan, which is a building block of the hormone serotonin, which is a feel-good hormone. Turkey, certain white meats have that. But again, if you're trying to use those types of foods to combat a mental illness, then you're probably going to have to gorge yourself. Um, and again, it depends on if we're talking about a mental illness, or are we talking about anxiety here and there? Because there's a difference,
Got
right?
it. Okay.
And I would like to hear more about what symptoms are the person having. You know,
Okay.
is it interfering with their ability to go about their day? Those are very important things. But I would caution against trying to treat yourself for
Got it.
things like anxiety. Anxiety can be very tricky to treat if you don't seek professional help. Now, certainly eating clean, as they say,
Mhm.
now, dairy from the diet, sugar, we talked about that. But in addition to that, really involving a medical professional to help you understand what's going on.
Got it. Another question that has come through. Are there studies that show how a person's blood type might impact someone's mental illness? Like, does it have any effect, the blood type?
There may be studies out there. I'm not aware of those. I can look into that, but that I'm not aware of.
Got it. Okay. Again, if you are just joining us, this is Girlfriends Pray, and we are speaking with Dr. Iyantta Howell. We've been talking about various different things this morning, managing anxiety and stress, some of the causes. In addition to that, she has shared some very helpful information about some studies that have been done. We have another question coming through. It says, can you take too many supplements and vitamins that produce anxiety? Can you take too many supplements and vitamins?
I want to be very honest and say that although the schools that I trained at, I felt that it was very good training. I didn't really get a lot of training in terms of natural supplements, remedies that you can take. So I trained at a school that was in allopathic medical schools. There's two types of medical schools. You have your allopathic medical schools, which usually gives the medical degree, an MD degree, and then you have your osteopathic medical schools, which are like your doctors who are DOs. Usually doctors who are DOs, they have generally more training in kind of the natural alternatives and other things, supplements, those types of things that can help treat illnesses. But, I didn't really get a lot of that during my training. The emphasis was really more so on the body, medications, medications that are basically FDA approved to treat certain diseases. So in that way, I would say, there is a such thing as toxicity. Even when you take certain vitamins, although vitamins are good for you, you really need to take them as prescribed, right? Because too much of anything can create some safety issues. But that's really all that I have to contribute to that question.
Got it. Okay. Been very helpful. Let's see if there are any additional questions. Again, this is Girlfriends Pray. We are joined by Dr. Iyantta Howell, who is a wealth of knowledge. We're very excited to welcome her here today. If you have any questions, please DM those to Girlfriends Pray. I know that there may be a couple of questions in the chat. Perhaps someone from the team will send those to me so that we can address them now. I wanted to also ask, if this information has been useful to you, please share to your social media platforms. As we all know, sharing is caring. So care about your friends and share this broadcast with someone that may need the information. Another question has come through. Let's see. Bear with me. Can you provide any resources for those that may be interested in seeking help for anxiety?
Yes. I did share some resources with Lamika prior to coming on today. I think you have those resources, a list of those resources. I don't know if she's going to share it in the chat, but yes, if you're struggling with anxiety or any other mental health issue, I would say, if you're not already connected to a mental health provider, to start with your primary care doctor. Tell them what you're going through, have them refer you to either a therapist or a psychiatrist. So I would definitely start there.
Okay.
Um, other avenues are, there's one foundation called the Loveland Foundation, and you can visit them online. It's called the lovelandfoundation.org, and it provides financial assistance to Black women and girls who cannot afford therapy.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was the name of the resources again? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's fine.
What was the name? It was called the Loveland.
Loveland. So it's the lovelandfoundation.org.
Okay.
Yes. So like I said, they provide, if you're having financial problems, they'll try to come alongside of you and assist you. Also, there is an organization called Melanin and Mental Health. And that's an organization that was actually designed by women of color. Mm-hmm. And they basically created a database, a national database, meaning that no matter where you live in the United States, you should be able to go onto their website, which is, again, Melanin and Mental Health.
Okay.
And type in your zip code, and they'll shoot you a list of, mental health providers in your area. Another resource is a resource called BEAM, BEAM, that stands for Black Emotional and Mental Health. And the website is beam.community.com. And they offer webinars to really help you cope. It talks about mental illness, what it is, what it looks like. So it's really meant to be a support in terms of you interfacing really with videos as opposed to an actual person. But, it can definitely be helpful. Absolutely. And those of you who live near big colleges or universities, a lot of times they will have psychiatry residency programs, and those residents really are looking for patients to learn from. So because of that reason, they offer therapy and or psychiatric services at a greatly reduced cost. So you may want to also start there.
Okay. I'm receiving notice from the team that the resources can be found on the Girlfriends Pray Facebook page, and they are in the comments. So if you are on Facebook, please visit the Girlfriends Pray page. The resources are there. Everything that Dr. Howell has shared with us today is in the Facebook page and in the comments. So please check that out. Let's see if there are any more questions. 2 more questions. We did talk about vitamin D a little bit earlier, but another question that has come through is related to vitamin E and the benefits of that. The question is, how beneficial is vitamin E?
Well, to my knowledge, vitamin E really supports neurological health, as well as kind of collagen production, hair, nails, those types of things. I'm not aware of any studies that links vitamin E as being protective against anxiety or mental illness.
Got it.
There may be a connection there, but that I'm not aware of.
Okay.
Another thing I wanted to add was, in addition to the resources being listed, I also listed references to the studies that I talked about.
Got it.
So if anyone's interested in looking that up, and certainly, refer to Girlfriends Pray Facebook page.
Thank you for that. Another question that has come through as we get ready to wrap up, and you and I have talked about this in different conversations, but we can address this here. The question is, why do you think the Black community frowns on going in for treatment? And this, we've had this conversation before, but can you please share, why do you think the Black community frowns on going in for treatment?
Well, I think particularly the Black community in the United States, the United States has a poor history of, their treatment of African Americans in terms of, having experimented on Black folks without their knowledge. There's a long-standing history, documented history of, experiments that the United States healthcare system has really done to really harm the Black community. And even the results of the study that I mentioned earlier about traumatic experiences being passed down in future generations. I think there's just a general distrust and anxiety about, if I go to my doctor, will they actually, number one, listen to me, and will they do things to harm me, right? And I think that history has never really been openly acknowledged by the healthcare system. So that really causes people to further, feel reluctant to go in. And again, back in the day, a lot of the psychiatric medications were very, very potent, right? They had these very intolerable side effects. They were very sedating. They would just really make people, I often hear the quote, I feel like a zombie, or the medication, I'm fearful that it'll make me a zombie. And back not many years ago, that was the case. Now a lot of the medications are a lot better, but still there's a lot of distrust there, especially in the Black community. And a lot of times it's hard to really deny that. So I think that contributes to a lot of it. I think lack of knowledge also contributes to that. Like I said, sometimes you can grow up in an environment where there's a lot of trauma, violence, and unfortunately, a lot of these environments are typical of where African Americans live, because there's just not a lot of opportunity. So wherever there's poverty, you're going to best believe there's going to be violence. So if you grew up in these communities, you're just violence is all around you, right? So you're going to be traumatized, but then you normalize it, right? You just think, oh, I thought everyone was like this. So you're kind of reluctant to get treatment because you really think you're okay, right? So those are some of the barriers that I've encountered to African Americans really seeking treatment.
And I think a lot of times too, we think we can handle it on our own. I mean, we're super women. We can do everything. But like you said before, earlier in our discussion, we really need to, like you said, honor our humanity. I thought that was a really great point.
Yeah.
Do you have any additional things that you want to share with us before we wrap up our discussion today?
No, I mean, I think that, it's important for us to really aggressively and intentionally push against anxiety, because it's one of the few psychiatric disorders that if you let it take control, it will really cause your life to be very small and narrow. Even from a faith-based standpoint, we can't do a lot for God if we're fearful, if we're anxious, right?
Right. We can't do anything because we're too scared.
Yeah. And there are tons of scriptures that repeat, fear not, I'm with you, fear not. Because if you allow anxiety to take control, you're really going to miss out on many great opportunities that God can bless you with. And then even you being able to, speak into the lives of other people, anxiety can really be a barrier there. So I really encourage people, if you are struggling with anxiety, there is help, but you really have to come outside of your comfort zone, which can be difficult, and seek the help. But the rewards will definitely be worth it.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Howell. Again, this has been an amazing discussion with Dr. Iyantta Howell. If you'd like to follow Iyantta on Facebook, you can find her, and her correct spelling is right here in the caption. It's Iyantta Howell, Iyantta Howell. She's here on Facebook, and she's here to help. And I think her contact information is also shared in the resources page that we've shared with the community today. Iyantta, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really a great discussion. We're so glad that you were able to be here with us today, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. All right, everyone. This has been Girlfriends Pray, and I am so grateful for this opportunity to continue to share with you. As we wrap up our discussion today, I want to remind you that this is only week 2 of a 4-week discussion. So next week, we will be talking about seasonal depression during the pandemic. And we will also be discussing processing grief and loss. So we are in the very middle of our discussion. So if you missed the discussion last week, we had Dr. Annette on, and she talked about COVID-19, the facts about the vaccination. So if you want to go back to the Girlfriends Pray page and watch that replay, you can find it there, and you can also find it on YouTube. In addition to that, I would like for you to tune in next week, where we will be right here at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And remember, 1 Thessalonians 5:17 says to pray without ceasing. God bless you and have a great rest of your weekend. We love you. Girlfriends Pray, signing off.